Then Gable Tostee leaves his apartment through the fire escape as emergency services arrive, which isn't sus at all. He walks around the streets for 43 minutes, attempts to call Warriena's phone before realizing he has her phone in his pocket. Tostee ends up on Cavell Avenue at 3:10 a.m. and orders a slice of pizza. And he can also see his apartment buildings from this point and can see the red and blue flashing lights of emergency services reflecting off his building. Tostee also rings his father during this time, and his father actually answers, and Tostee starts off by saying, "I might have a bit of a situation," before proceeding to explain the events of the night to his father. He explains that he was drinking with a girl before she became violent, and his solution was to lock her on the balcony to calm her down, but he thinks she may have jumped off. Tostee continues to his dad, quote, "Dad, this isn't my fault. I didn't do this. I was giving her my alcohol, but she was really violent, and I tackled her on my floor inside the building, but I never forced her over the balcony." Meanwhile, police arrived at the crime scene, where it had been reported that a young woman had fallen 14 stories. The woman, which they couldn't identify at the time, was dead and had 80 injuries to her body. And as Warriena had no phone, no ID, no driver's license, nothing on her, it actually took a few days to identify her officially. So hours later, the media were already reporting on this story. And that afternoon, the same day that Warriena had fallen to her death, Tostee and his lawyer go to the police station, where Tostee maintains his right to silence but does agree to forensic testing. So Tostee's immediately taken for forensic testing in the same clothes he was wearing the night before, and he is followed by a slew of reporters and photographers, all chasing Tostee's vehicle to see who this mystery man was. A few days later, Warriena is formally identified and Tostee's phone is confiscated along with the recording. Meanwhile, the internet forum bodybuilding.com has gone into overdrive, talking about their now most well-known member, GT, or Gable Tostee. And surprisingly, Tostee comes onto the forum to speak, where he had refused to speak to police or had maintained his right to silence. And he said, "I've been advised not to go into details, but all I will say is that I absolutely did not cause this girl to fall, and I am devastated about what happened to her." Less than a week later, the Wright family arrive on the Gold Coast. Warriena's younger sister, Mareza, addresses the media, asking for anyone with information to come forward. And it was a very emotional and a very tearful address, and she states,
my name is Mareza. I'm here to talk about my sister Ree, who's taken from me last night. My sister was a very private person, and it is very hard for me to talk about her. She would really hate all of this attention about her. Ree was the most important person in my world. Most of the time we only had each other to rely on. She was a very beautiful, intelligent, caring person who not only was my sister, but she was my best friend.
A few days later, on August the 15th, 2014, Gable Tostee is staying with his parents in their gated community on the Gold Coast. He is asleep when he is suddenly awoken at 10:40 a.m. and it's the police there to arrest Tostee for the murder of Warriena Wright. Detectives had listened to and analysed the audio from the night of Warriena's death and had come to the conclusion that Tostee had become so enraged and violent that it had scared Warriena enough to basically jump off the balcony instead of trying to face Tostee. On November the 18th, Tostee was released on bail to attend some counselling sessions, and in this time period he was banned from using all dating apps to meet women, which you would bloody well hope so. Tostee claims that during his time in prison waiting for bail, he was attacked by other inmates and suffered from headaches, anxiety, and insomnia. During his bail, however, Tostee did continue to use social media, particularly his Facebook page, which for some bizarre reason was not put to private. And so basically every status he made on Facebook became headline news, or news I should say, despite the fact that half of it had nothing to do with the case. It was just the fact that everyone was interested in this Gable Tostee character. On December the 10th, Tostee posted once again on bodybuilding.com, posting 2,000 words on his innocence or why he was innocent, and part of that said, "I know my lawyers might crucify me for writing this, but I feel that I needed to speak out as I have had no voice so far and have sustained so much abuse having my hands tied. I am not afraid of the truth." The next day, the audio in which Tostee had recorded on his phone was actually leaked on the internet, and the police never found out who leaked this audio, and Tostee's lawyer and Tostee declined to comment on the situation. So 2 months after being let out for bail, the drink driving offence from earlier that year that I mentioned earlier in the video finally caught up with him, and he was sentenced to 10 months in jail. So Gable Tostee was honestly making headlines across Australia, and people were divided. Some people thought he did it, he pushed Warriena Wright off the balcony, and others thought he was just an innocent man caught in a terrible, tragic situation. And however strange it may be to go down the fire escape and get pizza after a girl falls off your balcony, it's not illegal. So the committal hearing, which is where the judge decides whether there's enough evidence for a murder trial, was over super quickly, and it was decided that the case would go to trial. The trial started in October of 2016 in the Supreme Court, and on day one, Gable Tostee pleaded not guilty. And unsurprisingly, the media was heavily covering this case, people flying in from across Australia and New Zealand to be at Tostee's trial. And pretty much every day that Tostee came to court, he had to make his way through a media barrage of photographers and reporters, but during this time he stayed completely silent and emotionless as well. The jury, which was comprised of 6 men and 6 women, heard the audio recording from that night and also heard from witnesses who saw Warriena Wright fall to her death. Prosecutor Glenn Cash agreed with the police's view on what had happened the night Warriena died, claiming that Tostee had become so aggressive that Warriena was forced to escape over the balcony. He stated, "Why is she climbing down at all?" Answering his own question, he says, "Fear of the defendant, fear of Gable Tostee, fear of what he would do to her if he let her back inside." Prosecutor Cash argued that Tostee's aggression and violence that caused Warriena's actions that night were just the same as him basically just pushing her off the balcony. His job was really to convince the jury that Tostee's actions were unlawful. So for example, you can lawfully use excessive force in certain situations. For example, if an intruder comes into your house and you're defending yourself. Cash attempts to convince the jury that Tostee could have foreseen Warriena's death. And the defense argued that Tostee had just tried to defuse the situation, locking Warriena out on the balcony to calm things down and sort of as a bit of a time out for the both of them. They argued that he wasn't to know that she would attempt to climb down off the balcony. Barrister Saul Holt stated, "There would have to be someone chasing you with a knife in regards to the logic that would be involved to climb down a 14-story building." He stated that she just climbed into the darkness and lowered herself down. And the defense did not call on any witnesses, not even Tostee himself. So Justice John Bryn told the jury to consider several factors in making the decision on Gable Tostee's fate and whether he would be considered guilty of murder, manslaughter, or be found not guilty. He asked the jurors to consider whether placing Warriena Wright on the balcony and locking her outside after heavily drinking and violent outbursts where she would be in fear of her own life and consider death. He also asked the jurors to consider whether Tostee could have reasonably foreseen his actions and seen that it would lead to Warriena's death. The point of foreseeability in this case was very strongly pushed upon because of another case that had happened quite a while before this one in 1986. Kelly Louise Healy fell to her death from a 6-story apartment window after a violent altercation with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend, Kim William Royal, claimed that she just jumped out of the window in an act of suicide. It was argued in court that Kelly Louise Healy most probably did jump out of the window herself. However, she was in the position where she was so in fear of her life that her boyfriend may as well have just pushed her out the window. It was argued that a reasonable person would have foreseen these results, and as a result of this, her boyfriend was found guilty of murder. And it really changed the way the Australian court system looked at foreseeability in these sort of cases. And Justice John Bryn also told the jurors that what Tostee had done after Warriena's death, i.e. going to get pizza, were not to be taken into account. After 5.5 days of evidence in court, the jury was sent away to consider their verdict. They deliberated for 6 hours and were constantly asking for verification on different aspects of the case. After this time period, they came back to the judge and said they could not reach a unanimous decision. And Tostee appeared visibly dismayed, of course, at this lack of conclusion. Instead of dismissing the jury that day, Justice John Bryn sent them back to try again, basically. 3 days passed before the jury finally came to a unanimous decision. However, right before the verdict was about to be delivered, it was discovered that one of the jurors had been posting on Instagram coffee cups from the trial. I don't really know how that would have been considered breaking the rules, but anyway, she was not discussing the actual case on Instagram, but it was implied that she was there, and she did have 2,500 followers that saw this. So following this, Tostee's lawyer applied for a mistrial. He stated the jurors' acts left him with no confidence in the fairness of the process. He argued that by posting on social media that the juror had violated orders not to discuss the court case with outsiders. And the prosecution, of course, disagreed, claiming the Instagram posts really had no effect or anything to do with this court case. After Justice John Bryn was given a bit of a quick crash course in Instagram and how it worked, he sided with the prosecution. He stated, "Unfortunate though it is that she put material on a public website, it does not lead to the impression that a fair trial for the defendant has been jeopardized." So the jury, who had been in the holding room and had no idea about the drama that had just gone on, were finally called out to deliver their verdict. Gable Tostee, seated in the dock, had his head buried in his hands before sitting upright to hear the verdict and hear his fate. Tostee had friends and family in the courtroom supporting him, as did Warriena. Members of her family were sitting at the opposite end of the courtroom to Gable Tostee's supporters. And there really was not a spare seat in the courtroom that day. A lot of people were standing, and a lot were forced into the overflow room, or the overflow courtroom, to watch the verdict. The judge asked, "Do you find the defendant, Gable Tostee, guilty or not guilty of murder?" "Not guilty," the jury answered. At this point, Tostee's mother cried out in joy, while Warriena's mother just wiped a tear from her cheek, and Tostee just had no reaction, basically. The judge again asked, "Do you find the defendant, Gable Tostee, guilty or not guilty of manslaughter?" The jury responded with "not guilty." And at this point, of course, Gable Tostee looked incredibly relieved. Gable Tostee left the courtroom for the last time that day, making his way one more time through the media barrage, and as usual, he said nothing and remained expressionless. His lawyer did make a statement to the media stating Mr. Tostee is very happy with the result. He is relieved that this matter is now behind him and he's looking forward to moving on with his life. And there was many people standing outside the courtroom that day that definitely did have something to say about the verdict. Tostee, although he had many supporters, had many haters as well, some even shouting out "pig" at Tostee. So Tostee was walking and was waiting at traffic lights to cross the road when the media barrage caught up with him again, and they caught their first and only glimpse of emotion from him. He closed his eyes and raised his face to the sky in silence before continuing on. And there's like a very famous kind of photo of this. I'll pop that on the screen. Warriena Wright's family emerged from the courtroom shortly after this, and a family spokesperson stated, "This has been an incredibly traumatic situation for everyone involved in this case, let alone the families that have been impacted by this. Warriena Wright's family is still coming to terms with the loss of their daughter and their sister, as well as enduring the anguish of being present here at this trial for the last 2 weeks." And at this point, it had been 2 years since the death of Warriena Wright. So I'm just going to go over a couple of different points of things that may be worth noting that have happened since 2014. Tostee's lawyer, Nick Dorr, claims he was getting phone calls from agents and production companies interested in books and movies. And I just found this point interesting and disturbing. And 4 years later, nothing has come out of it, as far as I'm aware. Warriena's father, Warren, also believes that Tostee should have been charged with false imprisonment resulting in death and not a murder charge, which actually it makes quite a lot of sense to me. And Tostee did actually reach out to the Wright family to offer his condolences, but unsurprisingly, they didn't want to have a bar of him. And Gable Tostee actually did do a TV interview with 60 Minutes, and it's claimed he was paid anywhere between $100,000 to $250,000 for this interview. I personally haven't watched it. I'm not particularly interested in it. I'll link it down below if you do want to see it. So Gable Tostee, who now is in his early 30s, has changed his name to Eric Thomas. So in this case especially, I would love to hear your opinions and your thoughts on the verdict. I did try to keep my own personal thoughts and opinions as neutral as possible in this video, which was really hard. This was a very, very controversial case 4 years ago, and it's been incredibly interesting to revisit it. So thank you so much for listening to Warriena's story and being here today. If you found it interesting, like, comment, subscribe. Have an amazing day, guys. Stay safe, and I will see you soon.